Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with our next panel here. Hello, my name is Pam Hart, and I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Center for Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark Law School. Welcome. I've really been looking forward to this panel. We are now going to be talking about healthy, kind, and sustainable alternatives to eating meat. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to have our two experts here. We'll have our panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end of the session. So, our first panelist, Miyoko Schinner, is founder and CEO of Miyoko's Kitchen, a leader in innovative, award-winning organic dairy alternatives that aim to redefine the future of the creamery. She is a passionate culinary expert and author of 5 cookbooks and has hosted 3 seasons of Vegan Mashup, a cooking show that aired on PBS nationwide. An ardent activist working to change the culture of food, she is on the board of the Plant-Based Food Association and co-founder of Rancho Compasión, a farmed animal sanctuary that provides a home for over 80 farm animals. Next up, we have Christy Lagali. She is founder and CEO of Seattle Food Tech. Ms. Lagali is a mechanical engineer with 15 years of engineering experience and holder of 5 patents in manufacturing technology. She spent much of her career in the aerospace industry, working on commercial airplanes and spacecraft in testing, design, and manufacturing, while she was at Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Until January 2018, Ms. Lagali served as the senior scientist for the Good Food Institute, uncovering the technical barriers in the development of plant-based meat and clean meat. And with that, I will turn it over to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Well, hello, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you to the Animal Legal Defense Fund, Stephen Wells, for inviting me to this conference. I'm not a lawyer, although I'm married to a lawyer, but he's not doing animal law. He should be. So I commend all of you, and I think this is probably the second time I've been in a room where the collective IQ is, like through the roof. The last time was at the Ivy League vegan conference. So anyway, thank you so much for having me here, even though I'm not a lawyer. Secondly, as the CEO of this company, Miyoko's, I know Seth isn't here right now, Seth Tibbett of Tofurky, who gave that wonderful talk yesterday, but I wouldn't be in this position with this company had it not been for Seth Tibbett. So since he's not here, I'll tell this story. I'm not sure he'd want me to tell it, but, is Seth here? No. Seth is not here. Okay, just wanted to make sure. I saw someone who vaguely looked like Seth, but it wasn't him. But anyway, I've known Seth for decades. Back in the 90s, I had another company that was a rival to Seth's. So I had the Unturkey, and he had Tofurky. And we were the second leading turkey alternative in the country. He was the first. So we were kind of like rivals. But, this beautiful industry is one that is beyond our own brand. It's all about advancing a cause that's much bigger than each and every one of us. And so, of course, we stayed in touch over the years, kind of lost touch, but when I started playing around with vegan cheese a number of years ago, somebody put me back in touch with him. I don't know if any of you knew Lisa Shapiro, who passed away, but Lisa put us back in touch with each other. And I gave some of my cheese to Seth, and he said, you need to start a company. And I have been an entrepreneur since I was in my mid-20s back in 1980s, and I've not been a very good entrepreneur. Just about every business I've run has sort of fallen flat, and so I was not ever going to go into business again because everything I touched turned to ash. But Seth really, really encouraged me, and he said, this is a part that's a big secret, is he said, you do this and I'll be your first investor. And that really was, that vote of confidence was something that I needed so badly that, I was finally able to, he gave me so much time and so much good advice, and this is how the company started. It was all because of him. If he hadn't given me that vote of confidence, I swear to God, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. And when I first started in food 30 years ago, I had no idea the impact that food could have on animal rights, on the environment, on the future of food. I thought it was just something nice. I thought the people that were really making a difference were people like you, all of you, helping to change legislation, going out there and fighting the good battle every single day. And I thought people like us, we just made things that tasted good, and that was about it. And occasionally somebody would say, wow, that's really great. But that was about it. It wasn't rocket science. It wasn't, getting patents and developing all this new equipment like Christine for extruding new types of meat. It wasn't any of that. And so I really didn't think much of it. But I finally come to realize that it's one of the most impactful things that we can do. The fact is, business and consumers can make among the biggest differences to the planet, to where we are going. Industry can drive the future. The question is, so many of us in this disruptive role as young companies don't have a roadmap. We don't know how we're going to drive this change. How are we going to get there? Do we do it by staying small? How do we get big? Do we partner with bigger corporates? Do we use the word vegan? Do we use the word plant-based? Do we worry about what people are saying about plant-based products? And so we call them, I don't know, come up with some brand new name. Do we say dairy-free? Do we say non-dairy? I mean, what are we supposed to say about our products? How do we really drive the future? And that's really the key, is that I believe it is about driving the future. Seth talked about it yesterday, and I believe that future is coming, but I think it's coming even sooner than he presented. And I think it's up to industry to drive it. It's up to industry to define the future that we want it to be, and to create the kind of products that people don't even know about, that they haven't imagined, sort of like Steve Jobs and the smartphone or the white computer, showing people something they've never thought about, and not living in fear of the past. And so that's why we have decided at Miyoko's to redefine how we represent our products. We are no longer going to call our products non-dairy or dairy-free or dairy alternative. Those words are out of our vocabulary. We're going to revolutionize the dairy industry with plants. We are going to decide what the dairy industry of the future looks like, and we believe that it can come from plants. What we have decided is that dairy products up until now have come from animals. But why can't we say that in the future they're going to come from plants? And so we have decided that the dairy products of the future are going to be defined either as plant dairy or animal dairy. We're going to go toe to toe with animal dairy products and become not an inferior alternative, but a superior counterpart. And eventually, we are going to win, because all of the statistics show that. We're going to go through some of that, and you're going to see how we are winning out. Thank you. The fact of the matter is, we don't have a lot of time left to get things right. We can't dilly-dally. We can't live in fear of the past and think about, oh my gosh, I can't offend someone by introducing them to vegan, the word vegan. A lot of people say vegan. The word vegan has a lot of baggage. You don't want to, you want to tiptoe around, you want to say plant-based. That is a word that was concocted by the industry, and I am on the board of the Plant-Based Foods Association. So I am not speaking as a board member, and I do believe as a trade association that's a very, very important distinction to make. But I think that we need to hold the vegan banner high. In fact, so much so that I got myself a tattoo. There. And we need to speak about why, and speak about it proudly. And it's got to be like, oh my God, you're not vegan. You are so missing out. It's so fantastic. It's so great. You got to try it. You know what? I can help you. And we got to live proudly of what we're doing and shine a light on the movement rather than painting it as being so dark and scary and some horrible lifestyle change that people have to make. We can make it exciting and fun and drive the movement towards this. So it's been a phenomenal 4 years. I'm just going to talk really briefly about the beginning of Miyoko's. So it started 4 years ago in September of 2014. Yes, there I am, my little hairnet, and that's what we wore, and this is how we made our cheese. We manually put them into these little silicone molds, and I thought, oh my God, if we can make 30,000 units a month, this is going to be fantastic. Well, now we make, we make about 30,000 units a day. So, I mean, it's completely different. And, we're not even nearing capacity. So it's completely different. We started out in a tiny 2,000 square foot plant. We opened as an e-commerce business, and on a Friday afternoon, we went live on e-commerce. And by Monday morning, we had 500 unique orders, averaging about $100 each. And that's when we knew that, okay, maybe this idea of e-commerce and a little retail shop is not a good idea. Let's just try to go big. Initially, I was going to crawl and then walk and then run. And I just decided, you know what? I'm going to hit the mirror. I'm just going to start running right now. And that's where we are now. We built ourselves a 30,000 square foot facility. We went from a 40-pound batch to a 1,000 kilogram batch, which is 2,200 pounds. And we make multiple batches a day. So that's where we are right now. We were talking about, we're talking about poultry slaughter. Down the street is Petaluma Poultry, and we have 3 employees that are former Petaluma Poultry employees, and 2 of them are now vegan. So we try to make a difference with our employees as well. One of the things that I discovered as the company grew, because when we were really, really tiny in the very beginning, we had 4 of us, and here's what it looked like in 2014. This is actually a couple of months into 2014, so we had more than 4 employees. But we decided to start cooking lunch for our employees. So we kind of cooked. It was very casual. We all took turns cooking meals for everyone, and then companies just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, I thought, oh my God, the culture of the company, which is so important to me, and paying people a living wage and feeding them good vegan food was becoming threatened. So we just decided to hire a chef. So before we hired an HR manager, before we hired a chef. And now we have a sous chef. And we have delicious vegan meals all day long for our entire staff, and no one ever has to go off-site. We have delicious, organic, freshly cooked vegan meals. That's not our entire team. We have more people than that. But that's what we've been doing, is growing our team and growing our culture. We also show movies. We give talks about animal rights, and we have sometimes tours at my sanctuary, Rancho Compasión, which is only about 20 minutes away. So what we're trying to do now is to make the vegan movement mainstream. And how do we do that? How do we get these products into the mainstream market? What is the best way to do that? How do you talk to the mainstream consumer? I think it's really important to market to vegans and to speak their language. But more importantly, I think it's important to speak to those who are outside of the vegan movement, who are flexitarians, because we want to bring them over. That's the only way to increase this movement and to really catapult it into the mainstream. So I don't know what's going on here. Okay, so this is a cheese company right here. This is, this is a very pretty company. This is somewhere in England, but this is what the cheese case looks like in a regular supermarket. Something about this size. Sometimes it's even bigger than that. And we want to take that over. How do we become this? This is Wegmans. This is a Wegmans store in Massachusetts that I got to visit, and I was just shocked. 3 doors of vegan cheese. I don't see that many places. Usually you get what is called an alternative set. You get 2 shelves or 3 shelves, and they cram you in there. And one of the things that we have to do is start taking over the supermarket and planting our products throughout the supermarket in the areas that they should be. For example, if you were to take, let's say, a gluten-free cracker. Gluten-free crackers are found in the cracker aisle, are they not? But why is it that vegan products are in their own little subset, whether or not it's meat or dairy or something else? We're all crammed together along with the tofu and the salsa and, and the tortillas. And I just don't get it. And this is what we need. We need to take over the dairy case. And how do we do that? And it's because, and when we started 4 years ago, all these brands didn't exist. I couldn't even get all the brands of vegan cheese on this slide because there are so many today. And people often say, well, who's your biggest competitor? Well, I'll tell you who my biggest competitor is. That's my biggest competitor. These people are my collaborators. These are the people that are going to join together with us and become bigger than this and bigger than this. And that's how we have to think of it. We need more brands creating more delicious vegan products so that we can go toe-to-toe with the animal dairy products. We need to be able to take over that entire case. And we're headed in that direction because look at the sheer number of brands that are coming out today. And there's so many small companies as well. The question is, how do we get these companies to go big? How should they partner with other companies to maybe merge and become bigger? Should they, how do they raise capital? How do they get shelf space? It is so expensive to be in this business. The burn rate for these companies, just in terms of things like slotting fees, because we're now going into all of these major conventional supermarkets. We just shipped to Target, for example, last week. We're now in Kroger nationwide. We're at Trader Joe's. We're at Publix. And there's a discussion. We're almost at another really, really big chain, the biggest in the country. I will not name it. We'll just be in several hundred of those. But the fees are astronomical to land a shelf space, to land a spot on the shelves. So how are these little itty-bitty companies going to grow without an adequate amount of capital to do that? Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about U.S. dairy consumption. Seth discussed this earlier, but if you go back from 1975 to 2017, the fluid milk consumption rate has fallen by 100 pounds per person. In 1975, the average American drank 249 pounds of milk annually. It's down to 149 pounds of milk now. Cheese consumption on the average has risen slightly, and that's mainly because of mozzarella on pizza, because pizza is now a common food. And so we still have a battle to fight. The plant dairy fluids, the plant dairy milks have gained about 15% market share over animal dairy. So they're doing a great job. Now we got to do the same thing with plant cheese, which is expected to be a $4 billion industry by 2024. So it's getting up there, but it's not, it's growing at a faster rate than plant dairy milk, which has been growing at about 9% a year. Plant dairy cheese has been growing at about 20 to 40% a year. So the rate of growth is faster. So we will start taking over market share a lot more, but we've got a long ways to go there. Okay, so let's talk about what happens when a smaller company partners with a larger CPG company like Tyson. So some of you probably know that Tyson made an investment in Beyond Meat, and they also made an investment in Memphis Meats and Future Meat Technologies, which is an Israeli company, I believe. And the former CEO of Tyson's, he just left very recently for personal reasons. I'm hoping it's because he went vegan. I tried to research that. I couldn't find anything. He really did say, hey, we can grow meat without the animal. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't we? And he really feels that the future of food could be meatless. In fact, they have redefined themselves no longer as a meat company, but they call themselves a protein company. The CEO of Tyson says, we don't really know where the future of protein is going to come from, but most likely it's going to come more from plants than from animals. So we're now a protein company. They are still investing in meat. But they're trying to make their processing plants more humane, et cetera. But they're putting a lot of money into plants. So I know there was a huge outrage when Tyson received the investment, but look at the result that this had on Tyson. The fact is, how are we going to get from 0 to 60 as a tiny vegan company? And Beyond Meat is certainly sizable now, but it's still much, much smaller. It's tiny compared to Tyson. How are they going to become Tyson? How are they going to get there in the number of years we need to get there to reverse climate change and save the lives of billions of animals? How is that going to happen? Is it going to happen simply from just sheer investments? I don't know. But this is, to me, if we can change how corporations think, if we can change the trajectory of where the big corporates want to take their business because their investments in plants is outperforming their investment in meat, is that not a good thing? And that is really where I want to drive the conversation is how can we impact the corporates ourselves? How can these little disruptors, and there's all sorts of evidence out there that shows that true disruption is happening. I hate that word because everybody uses it, but it really, really is true. This is when the automobile is replacing the horse and buggy, or computers are replacing typewriters or whatever. But there is true disruption happening, and the big corporations are now listening to these little guys that have innovation. It's just like Uber or Lyft and how they threaten, they're changing mass transit. So there is a huge amount of power to David right now in speaking to Goliath. And we need to just speak louder and louder and louder. Yes, it's not a peer relationship, but it could be one of the most effective forms of relationships. So let's look at Maple Leaf. Just bought Light Life, they bought Field Roast, and the same thing is happening over there at Maple Leaf, which is a Canadian company. They're also making more investments in plants because they're seeing that there's a lot more growth in plant meat than in animal meat. And this trajectory could continue and snowball, and eventually Maple Leaf and Tyson could be vegan. Who knows? So Bauman Whiteman, which is a national restaurant consultancy market research company, basically said that 2018 was the year of plants, that it was the hottest trend in restaurants. They're finding that steakhouses are now incorporating plant-based meals, because if they don't do that, then there's always that odd person, that odd diner that doesn't want to go. So they're doing that because it's good business. You're leaving money on the table if you don't have vegan options on your menu. So when you go to a restaurant with your friends who are not vegan, go to an omnivore restaurant and just keep asking for, oh, but what about the vegan menu? Keep pushing, keep asking, because that is what's going to drive change. Meat and Poultry magazine says that the future of meat alternatives beyond 2017 looks bright. So there is a lot of awareness going on in the meat industry right now, in the dairy industry right now. You all know that with all the legislation that's out there. We're going to talk about that in a minute as well, too. But as Seth pointed out in the Gandhi slide, first they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win, or whatever it is. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they win. Okay, you win. So not they win, we win. So we are winning because we do have that attention right now. So here's what's going on right now, and I believe we are at that tipping point. So we've got 14% of the United States now regularly consuming plant-based foods. And what's interesting is that 86% of those shoppers that are buying plant-based foods aren't even vegan. So in other words, these plant foods are working in terms of reaching flexitarians and non-vegans. It's working, and we're getting more and more people to eat these products. So that's a huge percentage of the population right now. And they spend more money, too. The average shopper who buys plant products spends more money. There's a 61% increase in the plant-based shopper, and they spend about 18% more. So it's profitable. It's good business to carry plant-based products, whether it's at a restaurant or in a supermarket. And they also see not only the health benefits, but a lot of people today just say there's absolutely no need to eat meat anymore. Look at this percentage of the population. 14% of the United States says that really you don't need to eat meat today anymore. It's not even necessary. So we are at that tipping point. When you reach 10%, that's when it supposedly tips, according to Malcolm Gladwell. So I think we really, really are close to that vegan revolution. All right. The interesting thing is that when I went vegan back in the 1980s, and Seth talked about this yesterday too, but I had a choice between lentil loaf and lentil burgers, and that was about it, which is really what started my culinary journey. And I started experimenting and writing cookbooks and starting bakeries and restaurants and vegan businesses. It was really, there was nothing to eat that I like to eat because I like to eat good food. I like to eat food that tastes good. I don't know about y'all, but we're not doing it. I mean, yes, you can do it for the animals, you can do it for your health, but the fact of the matter is most people won't stick with it unless it tastes good. And so the interesting thing is today people are choosing plant-based foods because it tastes good. Isn't that remarkable? A lot of people are saying that it tastes better than the meat alternative. And what I mean by that is not the alternative to the meat, but the meat that is the alternative to plant meat. So what are some of the challenges? So I want to just talk a little bit about that. I have the luxury of living in this beautiful rural area where I have the farmed animal sanctuary, and I drive along this beautiful country road passing dairy farms and ranches on my way to Miyoko's every single day. And there's a lot of, I know a lot of ranchers, I know a lot of farmers, and I know ranchers that have confided in me that it kills them every single time the transport truck comes, and it breaks their heart, and they don't know what to do about it because they're 65 years old and they've never done anything but this. This is all they've ever known, and they don't know how to change. And then there are ranchers who, just don't care. There's different kinds, but there are more and more people in these rural communities that are struggling, whose livelihoods have been threatened by our industries and are conflicted. And some of them are, of course, there's a big pushback, and some of them are like, yeah, I kind of agree with these vegans, but I don't know what to do. And it's really real. We rescued a cow named Angel about 3 years ago from a dairy farmer who was going out of business, and it was his last cow. She was about 3 months old at the time. And he said, I'm going to finally retire, but for all these years I didn't retire because I always had to ask myself, how am I going to feed America? And this is really how they think. So that is a challenge. Now I'm bringing this up because there's a meeting that's happening in our community because a lot of these ranches and farms have been stormed by activists, and they're pushing back. And they're having this forum called, what are we going to do are you guys prepared when activists raid your farm? So this is very real because I live in the midst of this. And I wonder, how can we help these ranchers transition? How can we help these farmers transition to a new industry? By telling them that they are wrong. Maybe is not the way. In this rural community that I live in, the so-called Ladies Auxiliary asked me to do a vegan cooking demo. I had ranchers, I had farmers there, I had average people, and I also had temporary, phenomenally vegan tattoos. And I don't have a slide of it, but everyone put one on, and we took a picture. So there is awareness, there is interest, there is a desire to be better in these communities, and we have to figure out how to communicate with them. Everyone knows about the Dairy Pride Act, but this is something that we are battling. This is about the standards of identity that the FDA already has, that they have not enforced, that says that milk and cheese must come from the lacteal secretion of a mammal. And what they're trying to do, Tammy Baldwin, this is the Senate bill, and there's a House bill as well too, is to say that milk must be something that comes from a hooved animal. I know I'm going to have to just slide through these. In North Carolina, right now, they just passed a bill that says if it doesn't come from a hooved animal, you can't call it, but they actually need the support of 11 other states, or they're not going to enforce it. Okay, we just got our first letter. Actually, we didn't get it, but there was a letter from the American Butter Institute that went to the FDA saying that companies such as Miyoko's is using the term butter, and can you make them please stop? So the issue is, why does the FDA have these standards of identity? What is this all about? And the fact is that consumers are not confused. The PBFA did their own study and found that consumers know what almond milk is. They know that there's that it's not cow's milk, et cetera. And there was a study that came out yesterday that Danone did. Danone is a big yogurt company. Interestingly enough, they own both dairy and plant dairy and animal dairy products. So they own Silk as well, too. And they just did their own study and found the same thing as the PBFA, that consumers are not confused about what's in almond milk. But they also asked the question about terms like skim milk, whole milk, and lactose-free milk, and found that there was the same amount of confusion. In other words, about 25% of the consumers still weren't really sure if low-fat, lactose-free, et cetera, contained cow's milk. So there's confusion across the spectrum. There's always going to be about 25% of the population that's going to be confused, no matter what you put on the label. So, I mean, it's anyway. In Missouri, I think someone else is going to talk about this, or you are, but the Missouri bill, everyone knows about that, but it seems to be about cellular agriculture. And of course, we've got, so this is what's interesting that I want to point out, is about this. It's the National Cattlemen's Beef Association that proposed this bill. They're the ones that got the bill pushed through. So it's the ranchers. However, the North American Meat Institute, which has members such as Cargill and Tyson, opposed the bill, saying that this type of bill could halt innovation because we don't know where the future of protein is coming from. And the fact is, the future of protein could come from plants as well as animals, so let's not define meat as having to come from a hooved animal. So it's really, there's two sides. There's two sides of this equation, in the ring battling, the ranchers versus the trade association. And the same thing is happening in the dairy industry. So out with the old, in with the new. A great suggestion, if you can't beat them, join them. This is Elmhurst, a 90-year-old dairy in New York that decided that they were tired of losing profits, so the 83-year-old CEO decided to start making plant milk instead. So, yes, it's great. And now their profits are up. I know I'm running out of time, so I just want to get through. The Plant-Based Foods Association, which is really pushing legislation and also expanding retail efforts to get plant foods across the spectrum there. We're also talking about the Farm Bill, the dietary guidelines, and of course all the labeling issues that we've talked about. So we're going to have this website up really soon, the next few days. We're counting down the days. The FDA is now going to rule on the standards of identity and whether or not we can call our products butter, milk, cheese, et cetera. So there is a commenting period going on right now. We want you to act now, and I've got 3 minutes left. So this is the website that we're putting up in a few days, and we want you to join the plant dairy revolution. There, yeah. All right, so. Okay, I got 1 minute left, so we're going to talk about investments. Or am I out of time? Oh, I can keep going. Okay, profit and purpose. So we did have somebody from Veg Fund who was going to talk about investments, but she unfortunately had an injury and isn't here. So we're going to just talk a little bit about it. And so what's really, really exciting now is that, yes, consumers are waking up, industry is waking up, and I have the opportunity to talk at a lot of industry events, like conferences, and I always encourage people, I always tell industry that there's a moral mandate, really. It's really your moral obligation to start making products that are going to prove to save the planet. And the fact is, a lot of investors believe that now. They really believe in combining profit and purpose in order to create change. This is a whole new paradigm. So these are some of our investors. Obvious Ventures, their motto is called World Positive. And they don't just invest in food, but they invest in, they're invested in Beyond Meat, they're invested in us, they're invested also in new technologies that are helping to save the planet. JMK is the same, Stray Dog Capital is a vegan fund, New Crop Capital, and we have lots of friends and family that are all vegans that are supporting us. And we've been very, very lucky to align with these fabulous investors, but there are so many of these. Fair Farm Animal Investment Risks and Returns is a coalition of investors representing over $2 trillion that are investing strictly in plant products. So there's a lot of money in plants right now. So these are some of the investments that have taken place that we've covered earlier. But if we support the companies that have been acquired by the big corporates, if we don't boycott them, if we support them and they continue to do well, the big corporates are going to acquire and invest in more plant products. So we want to get flexitarians to buy these products. We should support them ourselves. That is my true belief. There's a lot of look at all of these people. Look at all of the protein that is available out there. All the incubators, the conferences, the nonprofits, and all of these venture capitalists that are now putting their money in plants. It's absolutely amazing. It's a rocket ship that's taken off that didn't even exist 10 years ago. So if it's here now, imagine where it's going to be in another 10 years. This is the plant-based dairy landscape. So I think I'm out of time, but I think the future is really, really powerful for plants, for the animals, and for all the inhabitants on this planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miyoko. That was amazing and just so inspiring. Thank you for that. My name is Christy Legale. I'm the founder and CEO of Seattle Food Tech. And I'll tell you just briefly about Seattle Food Tech. We're kind of an unusual plant-based meat company in that we do produce delicious, affordable, plant-based chicken nuggets and chicken patties, specifically for the food service market. We do not actually serve grocery stores or individuals. We sell everything through food service. But what we're trying to do is actually make it possible for plant-based meat to be the same price as animal-based meat, starting with literally the half of the chicken industry that we believe we can tackle first, which is that half of the chicken industry is actually what's called further processed or ready-to-eat chicken products made up of chicken nuggets, chicken patties, and chicken strips. So at Seattle Food Tech, what we do is we actually design new production systems and new production facilities to make it possible to reach low-cost price points for plant-based meat products. So what I want to talk about today is essentially kind of the philosophy behind what we're doing in terms of essentially replacing the infrastructure of factory farming and how we want to change this infrastructure to support plant-based meat replacement. So I hope you'll enjoy this journey. So just a little bit of overview on the discussion. First of all, I'm just going to share a little bit of the overview of the problem. A lot of people are kind of surprised to see the state of plant-based meat, and I don't mean plant-based foods. I want to be very specific. When I'm talking about this today, I am actually just very specifically talking about plant-based meat replacements, which are like direct replacements for meat. I'm not talking about tofu. I'm talking about, your plant-based chicken nugget or your tofurkey or your field roast or something like that. I'm going to talk a little bit about manufacturing technology, what it is and why it's important for large-scale production, both of plant-based meat and animal-based meat. A little bit about, actually a lot about competing on production and what that means, and I'll go into that pretty in depth, and how you can help. And I just was really proud of myself for finding a chicken lawyer. So, okay. All right, let's start with the scale of the problem. In the United States, we produce over 103, almost 104 billion pounds of animal meat. This is an all-time human record. It beats last year's all-time human record and the year before that all-time human record for the production of meat in the United States. And of course, worldwide, it's even larger. Unfortunately, because this is just so incredibly large, in comparison to plant-based meat, where we're only producing about 100 to 200 million pounds of plant-based meat, the actual percentage of volume of plant-based meat versus that 103, almost 104 billion pounds is only about 0.1% by volume of animal-based meat. Unfortunately, that volume is for me the number one reason why, you ask people, why can't you go vegan or something like that. The vast majority of people don't even have access to the meat replacements that many of us in here, get the opportunity to try. Additionally, while it is incredibly promising that, the plant-based meat industry, and again, plant-based meat, not plant-based foods, the plant-based industry is reported as growing at about 6% year over year, and it'll probably be larger, even estimates for this year, but this was just the reported at the end of last year. Unfortunately, it doesn't even seem quite enough, mostly because the animal-based meat industry continues to grow about 3% year over year, and is expected to be well over 110 billion, maybe closer to 112 billion just in the next 4 years. Again, that percentage of plant-based meat still hovers, unfortunately, for the next 4 years at about 0.1% of animal-based meat by volume, even with massive growth of 6% or maybe more. Hopefully it'll be a lot more, and I anticipate it will. But you can kind of get a sense of the problem. So how is this even possible? I apologize, I should have warned about the graphic nature of this slide. I get used to it as well. How is this even possible that in the world, or even in the United States, that we're able to process so many animals? Over 60 billion farm animals are processed in the world, and it wouldn't literally, with only about 7.5, almost 8 billion people on the planet, it literally wouldn't be possible without manufacturing technology or automation, mechanization, and that's what you're seeing here on let's see, you're right, I believe, is actually the black and white picture of, in the 1970s, this is a chicken processing machine called an Invisirator. And the color picture is actually more of a modern day chicken processing facility. And the reason that we're able to process so many chickens, or the carcasses of animals that are bigger and bigger than ever before, is really because we're using the best engineering, the best robotics, the best mechanization that we have in the United States and worldwide to make it possible for us to process billions of animals. And this puts, I believe, us kind of at a disadvantage, because it turns out we've been doing this for a really long time. The engineering world, and again, my background is in engineering, the engineering profession has been working on developing factory farming as a force of nature, shall we say, for a very long time. This is a picture from a future of factory farming, or a future of the world cartoon from 1961, showing how desirable it was to put all these animals in barns and automatically feed them and do all sorts of things like that. And in order for that to happen, of course, what's not in this photo, besides, instead they think they put the giant tomatoes there, is essentially what it's going to take to process all those animals once they industrialized it. And as I showed you in the previous slide, what it took was robotics and mechanization. Excuse me just a second. So the question now stands is, how do we catch up? Factory farming has been worked on for a very long time. It is very efficient. I would say, in terms of modernized production centers, probably it's only second, and it might be first, to cars in the United States. So we've kind of got a long way to go if we expect to do the volumes and the low price of animal-based meat. But the solution is basically simple. The solution is we need to make a lot of plant-based meat, and that's what we work on at Seattle Food Tech. This is actually two members of my team, Brenna and Shannon, at our production facility in South Seattle. We do currently produce plant-based chicken nuggets and chicken patties for a few of our food service customers. But that's where we are trying to do this to essentially, we're establishing ourselves as a company. But we're refining this process, and I just want to reiterate, we only actually do these 2 products. We actually believe that it's not in our best interest to do a lot of different products, because what we're actually focusing on is just making these products at very, very high scale, because they've never been done before for plant-based production. At extremely high scales, the type of scales that would really start to show up on that chart of 103 billion pounds of animal meat. So the way that we do this is at Seattle Food Tech, we employ engineering teams to design, build, operate automated and smart manufacturing production centers for the production of plant-based meat. And I'll go into this a little more in depth since we have a bit more time than I thought originally. But I wanted to talk about why this is so very important. As you can see, this is what made it possible for us to have that 103 billion pounds of animal meat. And essentially, we need to learn the lessons of the meat industry, to learn the lessons of large-scale plant-based or animal meat production, and apply it to the best of our ability to plant-based meat production. So what we do is we design new pieces of equipment that allow us to handle plant-based materials better, faster, cheaper. We also do something called designing modularized production facilities, which essentially is like saying, we've designed facilities that are easily adaptable to new locations so that we can replicate them over and over again. And this is exactly what the meat industry has done. They've gone into, they prepare a facility or design a facility, and what is learned and implemented and works really well in that facility is quickly put into another facility, or it's wholeheartedly replicated in Arkansas and then New Jersey and then Texas and wherever the next animal processing facility needs to be, all capitalizing on that robotics and mechanization. We can do the same thing. This is totally within our grasp. It's all about being able to execute this in a way that's smart and efficient and economical. So the goal then is that we are a company that is essentially, our product is plant-based meat, chicken nuggets and chicken patties, but our innovation is high-volume mechanized smart production centers, and production centers that we have ready to go talk to a city council member or our city council or some location where it might be economically viable for us to put in a new production facility. So essentially replicated production that allows us to set up facilities at lower cost and producing higher volumes than has just been seen in this industry before. So really, the goal, kind of the summary of our goal, is to compete with production and not just products, if that makes sense. What we're trying to do is we understand that the chicken industry has done an amazing job, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, essentially being a part of the growth of America, the economics of America, by putting chicken houses and all our chicken processing facilities in locations where chicken growing houses can be nearby so they can process those chickens. They've essentially invested in the infrastructure of America, and that in and of itself has made it a powerhouse that's been very difficult to essentially compete against. But we believe we can actually compete against that by designing our facilities so they are a much better opportunity for small town America, for locations in Alabama and California and New Jersey and all the places that are ready for a new chicken processing facility can then potentially choose our facility instead. And what we're after is, since we're trying to make sure that our facilities offer an opportunity for low-cost production and low capital cost, meaning it has to be not only low cost to produce, but also has to be low cost to set up these facilities. we are ready to take advantage of tax advantage or tax incentives, essentially going to the city council and saying, you know, instead of putting in a chicken processing facility, we'll take your tax incentives that you are going to give to Tyson or Purdue or somebody else, and we'll put in great jobs for that, for your people in your town if you set up one of our production facilities. Likewise, we can take advantage of government grants and programs. Luckily, I live in Washington State, where this is a huge opportunity. The local Washington State government is a big fan of supporting manufacturing in general. That's why we've got Boeing and all sorts of manufacturing kind of companies there. We can also take advantage of things like building leases, using production facilities that were once used for something else, and I kid you not, including what were used for chicken processing now. As you can imagine, we actually can convert these facilities and actually make them into plant-based meat facilities. But also taking advantage of environmental incentives, saying, we can offer we can offer a much cleaner process. We can offer a facility that doesn't have the waste. It doesn't have things like, chicken feathers and blood and things like that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we can also take advantage of job training. And all of these things come down to being able to being able to operate a facility that is established and is running at low enough cost so that our products can be sold to our customers at the low cost that chicken is. Essentially, we're doing exactly the same thing that the chicken industry's done. It's why chicken is so cheap. It's one of the reasons, not the only reason. So to really, really compete, we have to understand that chicken production is really all about jobs. And I think this was probably one of those epiphany moments for me when I started to plan to start the company of Seattle Food Tech, is that if we were to compete on the economics of chicken, we had to compete with our ability to offer jobs. And so more and more, as we're designing our modularized, automated smart production center, we're able to look at, okay, when we talk to small towns or talk to even towns or economic development corporations in Washington State, we can say, yes, this facility, maybe it's only 30,000 square feet to start, but it can offer 15 jobs. Or our future facility can be in 200,000 square feet, and that one can offer over 200 jobs. I hope one day, I was thinking last night to Seth's wonderful future headlines, I really hope one day this will say, Seattle Food Tech's expansion offers 1,000 jobs, or it grows Nebraska. Because I really do believe that's where we have to compete. We have to be able to go out into the world and say, plant-based meat is going to offer the jobs and provide you the economic security you need in your town. Further, we haven't gotten to this yet, but we're already starting to plan for it, is looking at economic opportunity zones. So as many of you may already be familiar with this because you're all lawyers and I'm not, essentially, these are locations in the United States which are often utilized by the chicken industry to put in production facilities, obviously to offer jobs, and essentially allow these companies to have reduced taxes as a result. And so we're looking at the same thing. And essentially, I put this slide up there to just say, we have to do the same thing. We have to learn from the chicken industry, do what they did in order to capitalize on low-cost opportunities by tax relief and the things I mentioned earlier. And then, last but not least, but we obviously have to sell the benefits to the community. And I think I couldn't be more happy that we came after the last panel, because I think they just totally laid out for us everything that was wrong with factory farming from a community perspective. But I'll just go through these somewhat quickly. Obviously, improved public health is a benefit of processing plant-based meat instead of processing chickens into chicken nuggets. We avoid all the pollution. One really interesting, I'll tell that in just a second. We'll avoid the pollution that was already shown to us earlier. We provide safer jobs, also that was discussed earlier. And then reduced strain on infrastructure is probably one of the areas that I'm most interested in, because there was a really interesting case maybe about 6 months ago where a small town, I believe it was in Nebraska, I might have that wrong, I believe it was in Nebraska, but the city council approved a new chicken processing facility. They did it on the basis of having new jobs come to the area, and then they raised taxes on the entire town so that they could increase the volume of waste from the chicken facility to go through the main wastewater facility so it could process all of the blood and feathers. So essentially, all of these townspeople, of course, got new jobs, but they also had to pay for the public improvements because a chicken facility is so hard on the infrastructure in the town where it goes in. So it's really, not fair from that perspective. And last, it kind of fell off the slide, is that we can offer an improved economy because of all the things above. When you're not dealing with the public health problems, you have obviously a lot less or almost completely avoidable injuries in the workplace. This is just better for everybody. I probably don't have to convince you of that. So I'd like to just talk a little bit more about how to help. In terms of grassroots effort, I think, I actually have learned a lot today because I was not even aware of all of the grassroots efforts that you guys have already made me aware of as a result of the talks today. But definitely, we're starting to see local townspeople speaking out against factory farming in a much stronger way than we've ever seen before, which is really great. I have no doubt that some of that is backed up by some of you and the work that you're doing. But the more that we see this resistance, the more it gives Seattle Food Tech and potentially other companies like us the opportunity to come in and say, we have a shovel-ready facility for you, and we can offer you the same number of jobs. You don't have to raise taxes for your infrastructure, and we can offer you a much better opportunity. We can take the same tax benefits and, of course, pass those savings on to lower-cost products. The second thing I wanted to just bring to your attention, and also I think will require a lot of future thought, is on the issue of encroachment. So in Kansas, I believe it was late last year, I think it says, actually it was March of this year. March of this year, Kansas actually passed a law that now allowed for chicken plant processing and factory farms like growing houses to be now within 1/4 mile of a residential area, whereas before I believe they had to be more than 1/4 mile. Correct me if I'm wrong later, but it was an interesting situation because essentially they were trying to lure companies to their town. Why they focused on chicken, I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons, but what I see this as an opportunity to start advocating for our type of production. So plant-based meat production, I think, is a much easier sell in general, but certainly there are things we're going to want. Maybe better roads because our production can be so much higher than a chicken facility. Or, similar changes that are specific to plant-based meat production. I think we need to start thinking in the future about how we can lure plant-based meat production to, local towns. And I don't think this is something that's going to happen tomorrow. It might not even happen next year. But I do think it's really important as we look at laws and legislation and advocacy to start kind of thinking about what is happening in terms of legislation, and also in the case of like Tyson, where they tried to put a chicken facility in Kansas and got a lot of pushback, so they just went to Tennessee. And it would be just extremely helpful for me in terms of understanding where we could go in terms of making things more beneficial for plant-based meat production. And I just want to kind of put that out there because I do think it's going to take a lot of initial building opportunities to start with, but as we go on, I anticipate the opportunities for plant-based meat production and getting essentially tax breaks and laws changed so that it's easier for our facilities to go in there should be a part of our conversation. So I don't think I need to even go over this even more because it was so heavily covered in the last talk. But we definitely need to continue to support worker and environmental safety. Obviously, the Obviously, the work that you are already doing in this area is not only beneficial for addressing, animal welfare and human health and environmental, but this gives us so much fodder for being able to go to a small town or an economic development center and say, plant-based meat production center, maybe it costs a little more, maybe it costs a little less, is just going to be so much better for your town. Build one of our facilities. It's ready to go. Don't choose the chicken facility because we can do better. And I think for all the reasons that are kind of listed here, slaughterhouse injuries, it's better for the town, like we mentioned earlier. And of course, there's not a whole lot of chance of being sued for a whole lot of pollution because, to be perfectly honest, our plant-based meat production facilities, the ones for Seattle Food Tech, and I have no doubt that's the case for other plant-based meat production centers, tend to have pretty low waste. Obviously, don't have feathers and blood and things like that. But just in general, I'm always amazed at how little waste that our facilities have, just in general. So I wanted to just talk a little bit just about my summary of kind of this word of replacing factory farming, because that's really what we're trying to do here at Seattle Food Tech. We're really trying to make it possible for us to replace the infrastructure of factory farming. And so I feel like there's kind of 3 key points. I just want to kind of go over them again in case I haven't nailed it into you yet. First, obviously we need to understand the scale of the meat industry, and we need to learn from meat industry success, whether it be how to deal with governments, whether it be mechanization, whether it be, big buying conglomerates, whether it be asking for better roads, bigger tax breaks, whatever. We really need to learn from that because they undoubtedly have been incredibly successful. They continue to be incredibly successful. And if we want to compete with that, we need to do some of the same things. Second, I think I mentioned this earlier, I really do feel strongly that engineered problems, i.e. factory farming and large-scale chicken processing, calls for engineered solutions. And of course, that's what we do here at Seattle Food Tech, is that engineered solutions come in the form of essentially developing the factory farm for plant-based meat, which is, of course, what we're trying to do. And then most importantly, and I think this is where I get the most excited about the work that we're doing, that we're really trying to compete for an economy, not just a consumer. At Seattle Food Tech, we are actually what's called a non-branded company or a white label company. You won't find our products in the stores. They're always sold directly to a food service company. We essentially don't brand them ourselves. They could be branded later on down the line by others. But we believe entirely on focusing on manufacturing production, food production at high volume to make a really substantial difference in the amount of plant-based meat out there. And in the ways I've already described, this is how we hope to not just compete with the essentially meat as a product, like chicken nuggets versus chicken, plant-based chicken nuggets versus animal-based chicken nuggets, but to actually compete for the economy of Nebraska, the economy of St. Louis or Alabama or wherever the next opportunity is to put in production. So I think I went through that pretty fast. I'm really honored to actually be here and to share with you what we are doing here. I did want to add one last thing because I promised I would include it about investment. Is that okay? Or we have a few minutes? Okay. There are a couple thoughts I wanted to talk just to kind of add on to what Miyoko already covered because that was just excellent. There is no doubt this is the time for us to take advantage of not only the momentum in the plant-based foods world, but in the interest, all of the work that you've done as advocates has continued to kind of add to that groundswell. A lot of people come to me and say that, it's plant-based meat, and plant-based foods that's going to make a huge difference in terms of really starting to mitigate factory farming. I have no doubt of that. I want you to, first of all, I just want you to know that in every part of our negotiations with, an economic development group in Washington or a Port of Skagit and the Port of Seattle, which we work with to look at putting in new production facilities, or even with our customers, I frequently, if not every single time, hear the impacts of what the work of advocates are doing. Whether it be from, we know, factory farming isn't as good, is bad for the environment, they'll come to me with that information. Or I had one chef actually say to me, he tried our plant-based chicken nuggets. He loved the fact that we could offer them at near the same price as animal-based chicken nuggets. He was totally ready to buy, and he was walking out the room and he said, if we don't have to kill animals, why would we? And he wasn't an advocate. He just been waiting for us to meet all of his needs, and that was really exciting. So I just want to take one last moment to talk a little bit about investment. Seattle Food Tech is a startup. Technically, we've only been in operation for 9 months. We've been in business for a year. And I think what is a little bit unusual about our company, and I hope we'll see other companies like ours, is that investing in Seattle Food Tech is actually investing more in infrastructure than it is in product. And I think you've probably already gotten that from what I was talking about. But as we move forward, I really do think we kind of need to broaden our perspective about what investment means. It's not just about a really great brand, which brands are fabulous. They are what assure consumers that a product is really good. As a non-branded company, it's not something that we necessarily focus on because we focus on other things. So we have to also think about it as not just investing in food, it's also investing in infrastructure, investing in capacity, and investing in duplication. And I think those are the areas where I hope as we kind of evolve in understanding more about what Seth's future is vegan looks like, we'll start to see a more diverse investment strategy of not just food, but also infrastructure and capacity and duplication. So essentially, we want to see a new platform for the production of meat, obviously it being plant-based. And in summary, that's what we're trying to do at Seattle Food Tech. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine Miyoko. Before we jump to the Q&A, there's been a few references to the law and some legal implications about this area. So I'd like to invite Amanda Howell up to speak with us for a few minutes about this. She is a staff attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and she has graciously agreed to join us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you bear with me. I'm being a little bit of a pinch hitter right here, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of the legal battles that involve the sustainable alternatives that we've heard about today. Thanks probably in super large part because of the drastic increase in the sales and popularity of plant-based foods, and I'm talking about plant-based meats and plant-based dairy products. We've seen that the animal agriculture industry is increasingly trying to use state laws and federal regulations to kind of shore up their own industries and obstruct and attack even plant-based industries. And they're doing that by attacking their ability to market and label their products truthfully and convey what the nature and contents of the products are to consumers. Back in June, Missouri passed a law that pretty much just a First Amendment violation all over the place. The Animal Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU of Missouri, the Good Food Institute, and thanks to our amazing plaintiff, Tofurky, challenged this law. The law, actually, I'll read you the language, and you can tell me if it makes any more sense to you than it does to me. It prohibits misrepresenting a product as meat that is not derived from harvested production, livestock, or poultry. Okay, what does that mean? Your guess is as good as mine, and it's also as good as the guess of 115 county prosecutors that could use this law it's a Class A misdemeanor, so they could use this law to throw anybody who markets or sells products, plant-based products, meats, in Missouri in jail for up to a year and a fine of $1,000. So that's pretty crazy because, again, if I can't tell you what that law means and what someone's going to say is misrepresenting something as meat, and it can mean anything from using the terms veggie sausage or vegan ham or anything like that. So that's pretty egregious, and pretty much looking at the legislative history of this law, it's pretty explicit that the aim of the law was to protect the animal agriculture industry, and because they perceive plant-based and lab-grown alternatives as a growing threat to their market share. Some people are under the impression that this law doesn't apply to plant-based meats, but it's pretty clear, again, looking from the legislative history. They were just discussing, both clean meat and plant-based meats that were a threat to their beef and cattle industry. This came from the Missouri Cattlemen's Association. And also, we know that it also includes plant-based meats because of an enforcement memo from the Department of Agriculture of Missouri. So this law pretty much violates the constitutional guarantee of free speech and due process and also free market principles. The really weird thing is, kind of as a post hoc rationalization, the lawmakers said that this law was about consumer protection, basically saying that people are going to the store and buying a Tofurky veggie ham or veggie roast and thinking that they are getting a dead animal. Like, I'm pretty sure no one's ever done that in the history of anything. So again, blatant industry protectionism. There's no evidence whatsoever of any consumer confusion. The Missouri AG's office doesn't have a single complaint from any consumer saying, hey, I thought I was getting a steak and I got a vegetable instead. So again, it's pretty clear this is not about protecting consumers, because consumers are not confused. And it's even more ironic because, again, the products that you see on the shelves are trying to differentiate themselves because people care about animal welfare, because they care about the environment, because they care about their own health and public health. So you see pretty clearly that on the principal display panels of all of these products, everyone's making it very clear that the products are plant-based. So again, that's just a pretty disingenuous thing. It's really important because this is the first type of law that's passed that we've seen on a state level. We're challenging it because other states, almost every single state in the country other than maybe Alaska, has a cattlemen's association. So everyone's looking at this to see if they can pass similar laws in other states. We would have a patchwork of laws, and all of this means that amazing companies like Tofurky and other plant-based meats would not be able to call themselves that. They would have to call themselves something like texturized veggie kibble or something, I don't know. So that wouldn't be great, and the animal agriculture industry knows that, and that's exactly why they're trying to use these, to create these laws so that the plant-based meat companies can't call themselves meat or ham or veggie or anything like that. The second thing that I wanted to touch on really briefly, I think Miyoko covered this a little bit, standards of identity. And I will try not to be too boring about this. It does involve FDA regulations. But standards of identity is basically a recipe for some product. FDA started using them way back in like 1938. And they started off saying, like, we're going to create a recipe for all these different products. And if you don't follow the recipe, then you can't call yourself this thing. All right? FDA pretty much recognized right away, like, oh crap, there's hundreds and thousands of products out there. We won't be able to create standards of identity for every single product. They started looking to statements of identity, standard statements. Statements of identity is just the common or usual name for a product, and that's what plant-based cheeses and plant-based milks and plant-based yogurts are. They are truthful and non-misleading statements of identity. The Animal Legal Defense Fund, along with Compassion Over Killing and the UCLA's Resnick Center for Food Law and Policy, just submitted comments to FDA basically saying you should not be trying to enforce standards of identity against plant-based dairies because they're inapplicable. There's no consumer confusion whatsoever, again, kind of a post hoc rationalization as a result of pressure from the dairy industry. And federal regulations and state laws should not be used as a sword to basically shore up one industry over another. Happy to answer any questions, but I hope I wasn't too boring on that, on the standards of identity thing. But Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for Amanda. And as she said, she is helping us out and filling in for Amy Trzynski, who couldn't join us today. We miss her, but we're so happy to have Amanda on the panel with us. So thank you. So now we will open it up for a Q&A. Mics on each side. If anyone would like to come up, we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A. We have one person coming up. Don't be shy. We have another person. Would you like to start, Becky?
Sure. Thank you very much. That was really informative and interesting. So I work at the Center for Animal Law Studies' new Aquatic Animal Law Initiative. And so I'm really interested in alternatives to seafood products and seafood. And I'm just kind of curious, it didn't come up in much detail, so I'd love to hear all of your opinions about why this kind of can often go under the radar and what your thoughts are about that industry, since fish and aquatic animals represent even more than the terrestrially raised counterparts.
Well, there are some really great alternatives, or let's just say plant fish that are coming to the marketplace, which is really fantastic because we are depleting the oceans, and in fact, there's not going to be any fish left in the sea by 2050 if we don't do something about it. So, I mean, you're not going to be able to eat fish in a few years anyway, so you might as well stop now, is the way I look at it. But there's some really great companies that are coming out. There's one called Good Catch, which is coming out with this really, really believable tuna. It's really fantastic. There's New Wave Foods that makes a shrimp. So there's technologies in that as well too, and I believe there is a company that's working in cellular agriculture in that arena as well too. I don't know if Christine, if you're not, I can't remember the name of the company that's doing that.
Terramino Foods.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I think there's also one other issue that has kind of held back the issue of plant-based plant-based seafoods. I don't know where that woman went. Oh, there she is. Plant-based seafoods. I actually do think it's in part a technology problem, not from the perspective of the ingredients that go into it, but something near and dear to my heart, which is manufacturing technology. Getting the texture and the moisture and the shape and size of plant-based seafoods, like something similar to a whitefish, is not that easy, just in general. And then it's even less easy doing it at scale. It is an area that we're looking at pretty actively right now to do it at scale, but it's not as easy as chicken for a really long and involved conversation about how to make plant-based meat and how it results in certain types of textures as a result of the technology, the manufacturing method that we use to do it. So I think there's a genuine reason there just from that perspective, but like Miyoko said, there's a lot of people working on this issue. I think we are going to see more of an explosion in that area, but I think there's going to be also a lot of solutions to it.
Hi, my name is Cassie. I am a current 3L at Cumberland School of Law in Birmingham, Alabama. I have a question for Amanda about ALDF and their work against the Missouri law that is trying to define meat. And I guess my question's kind of boring because it's about like legal principles and issues.
Ooh, my favorite.
And I was just making sure and wondering if they made a Commerce Clause argument, because that was the first thing I thought of that.
We did indeed have a dormant commerce clause claim. I just didn't mention it because I have trouble saying the word dormant. Yeah, basically, it is a burden on interstate commerce, right. And unless that burden, which is really substantial when you're thinking about how onerous it would be for a company to change all of their marketing, all of their packaging. And I mean, even if they don't sell in Missouri, which, why wouldn't they? It's generally tends to be regional, so they'd have to stop selling in that region. And if someone went on the internet in Missouri and saw their misleading packaging or their misleading advertising, that still could get them in trouble as a Class A misdemeanor under the law. So you compare that burden with the putative local benefit here, which is that consumer confusion, and there's no evidence whatsoever of consumer confusion. I think it's pretty clear on its face that it's substantially outweighed. So yeah, we did include a Dormant Commerce Clause claim.
Okay, thank you.
Hey there. Thank you all so much. What a great panel. And special thanks to Miyokos for bringing a bunch of your products to the conference last night. Yeah, I hope everyone got to sample those. I'm becoming a repeat complainer in my local grocery stores because they are always sold out or don't carry all your products. So that was awesome. So my name is Tyler Abdel. I'm the Food Law Fellow for ALDF, and part of my job is to hold the producers of animal-derived food products accountable for their marketing. And so I'm curious to hear, and I'm especially curious because we have a white label company and a branded company here on this panel. Curious to hear your thoughts on whether or not this growing trend of humane and greenwashing by animal-derived food products. As consumers are more and more concerned about animal welfare and environmental sustainability, we're seeing large companies, instead of investing to meaningfully change their production practices, they change their marketing. And so I'm curious if you see that as a threat to your business model, given that consumers are, to a certain degree, turning to alternative products because of animal welfare considerations, human health considerations, environmental sustainability, if those types of misleading marketing tactics by animal-derived products is a threat to you, and if you see it as undermining market adoption and consumer adoption.
Well, I live in the I don't know what you call it, the hotbed of the humane farming area, organic meat and dairy in West Marin and Sonoma, where everyone feels good about what they're eating because they're eating so-called humanely raised animals. And I know a lot of these ranchers, but the fact remains that we were going to have 9 billion people on this planet in a few years, and we got to figure out how we're going to feed them. And just like the report that came out last week, the fact is we're not going to be able to feed them by eating humane meat. That feeds a very small percentage of very elite, wealthy, mostly white people. And that's the bottom line. And I think that information is actually beginning to get out. People are realizing this is not a solution when animal agriculture already takes up 1/3 of all land mass in the United States. And if we now go to all, so-called rotational grazing, free-range animals, now we're going to take up the entire United States, and there will be no place left for humans to live. And that truth, I think, is beginning to come out, and people are beginning to open up. I don't see anything as a threat. I'm just not fazed by that or anything else. And I think we have to just not worry. We can't live in fear just like they're living in fear. They're living in fear of us. We can't live in fear of them. We have to drive the future. We have to define the kind of future we want and just go forth. And so, if we can have that sort of positive vision, I really feel that we can make a change.
Thank you.
The answer from my experience is flat out no. Nobody's confused. They absolutely, all of our customers, which are always usually food service professionals, whether in hospitals or restaurants, they know 100% what they want and what they're going after. And I think it just leads to, of course, their defense regarding that. And in the case of hospitals, last year the American Medical Association banned processed meats or highly recommended the removal of processed meats from hospitals. So things like chicken nugget, bacon, sausage, and things like that. So most of our customers are actually hospitals, and they are, I wouldn't say desperate. Well, actually, I would say desperate for an alternative because they depend on these ready-to-eat foods, usually coming in the form of ready-to-eat chicken products, for cost savings and quick service to their patients, to their customers, to their cafeterias. And so they very, very, very much want it to be plant-based because we can offer a product that has all the things that lacks all the things that they're trying to get away from and are being mandated by the American Medical Association to get away from. So I agree, consumers are not confused at all.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm a current law student at the University of Virginia School of Law. Thanks for being here today. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why focus on alternative meat and meat alternative products rather than just less processed and quote-unquote natural, for lack of a better word, foods such as whole grains, legumes, etc. It would seem to avoid the whole problem of consumer confusion. Just curious to hear your thoughts. Do you see it as the only realistically feasible way to shift American consumers away from meat alternatives? Do you see it as a short-term versus long-term fix? Any thoughts are welcome.
Yeah, I'm sure Christine, who's making them, has very, very strong thoughts. But the fact is, if you tell people, hey, just eat beans and rice, they're just not going to do it. People are used to, it's cultural. People identify with certain foods. And it's very, very hard to make a lifestyle change. That's one of the reasons people don't talk about it at environmental conferences. It's a faux pas to mention, eating a plant-based diet. And so the easiest thing you can do is to provide them with familiar foods that help them make that transition, that give that same sense of satisfaction. We know that one of the things that have held people back from adopting this type of diet really had to do with taste. And it's beginning to shift now because the products that we're making actually taste better than the animal counterparts. So, that's really, I think the key is it's a cultural identity issue. And so if we were in a different country, we would probably want to make different kinds of foods that would answer those needs, the needs of those people.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I'd love to add another layer to that because what we hear from our customers, our hospitals, schools, institutions in general, is that they serve things like chicken nuggets and chicken patties and fish sticks not because they're healthy, not because, they serve them in part because people eat them, but they are a critical component to being able to run a food service establishment without going into the red. So essentially, you have a choice when you're running a food service establishment. You can, have somebody spend incredible labor costs producing whole grain, plant-based, ready, essentially made from scratch meals at every meal. And you can spend enormous labor cost, or you could spend almost no labor cost for that same meal and pop in chicken nuggets and 10 sheet pans of chicken nuggets, and you've literally cut your labor cost by maybe 1/20th, it's a 1/20th. So the use of ready-to-eat animal products like chicken nuggets, hamburgers, things like that, they serve a really important economic role in essentially offering food service to major institutions. And to ask them to literally make every meal from scratch from there on out is not something they're willing to do simply because they would kind of go out of business. So right now we are dependent on meat, these ready-to-eat meat products, in order for them to run their businesses. So that's why we felt like it was really important to start a company where we were literally just offering a one-for-one same cost replacement so they didn't have to make that choice between meat and going out of business. Does that make sense? Okay.
I would just like to add also that I think this is one of the other reasons that protecting labeling conventions for plant-based meats is really important because, you're a person who's not super sophisticated, who is just trying to, be trying out plant-based meats for the first time, they don't necessarily know how to use them. So it's really important to have the names like sausages or deli slices or something like that, so they can look for that like, one-to-one analog of like, I just want to make myself a sandwich and I don't know how to do that in a vegetarian way. So being able to say, this is a deli slice or a ham roast deli slice, something like that is very important because it tells the consumer the nature and the contents, what to expect in terms of taste and how to use it. So.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and I think we have time for one more question, one more quick question.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentations. My question is about your read on the traditional meat industry. And like any industry that goes through rapid transition, the old school companies or the sort of long-standing legacy companies are divided between those who are embracing the next segment of that sector and those who want to hold on to the past, the protectionists. And my question is, to what extent are you seeing that those who are embracing the future, to what extent would you ascribe that to leadership of those companies versus kind of the organizational culture of those companies versus their reading the data differently than other companies within their sector? I know that's a broad question, but I just wonder what your read is on the meat-based sector.
I'm not sure I quite understood that. But you're talking about the big corporates and why are they making that shift? I mean, one of them is that they all read industry data and market research. So I can tell you that anyone who's in the plant dairy space knows exactly what our performance is in every market. And we know about where we are, we know where we sit as well too. So if it's Tyson, they're looking at Nielsen and Spins, and they're looking at all this data and seeing the trajectory. Conventional foods have been flatlining, not growing at all, losing market share. And so there's a lot of economic reasons for these companies to make the shift. The importance is when the types of companies that we have, the disruptive companies, start becoming profitable and they start taking away market share from the other company, the corporate, they will be more encouraged to keep siphoning more money into our arena.
Yeah, and I also kind of think I guess it kind of comes down to how they're being impacted economically, I think. As Miyoko said, they all see the same data, but I think, the beef industry came out very much in the attack mode, and essentially the chicken industry came out in the we're all friends mode. And I think that they're just living in very different economic worlds. And, part of the reason Seattle Food Tech can kind of capitalize on the economics of the chicken industry is that we can relate to that a little bit better than, I don't know how to replace a cattle farmer out in the field, but I can offer jobs to every person in a chicken processing facility so they can now work in the plant-based chicken processing facility.
Thank you for that question. And thank you to our wonderful panelists and you all for joining us today. We will now go into a 15-minute break, and then next up with Russ Mead is